Okay, in this video I'm going to be talking about plugins. Specifically, I'm going to highlight two plugins, Spring Security Core and one I made called Enforcer. And we'll talk a little bit about plugins and how they play into the Groovy application. So let's go to grails.org, and I went to the plugins section, and as you'll see here, there's a bunch of plugins. Now there's separated into a couple categories, the Grails 3 and the Grails 1/2. Grails 3 plugins are not compatible with the Grails 1 or 2 plugins because of the change from Gantt to Gradle. So Gradle becoming the build system, so that changed a whole bunch of things for the plugins. But a lot of the main plugins have been ported over to Grails 3. All the major ones like Spring Security and any of the security-based ones, the asset pipelines, things of that nature. Some have not made the jump from the older versions to the newer versions just because of some of them were build related, and some of them haven't been, maintained in a long time because Grails has been around for quite a while at this point. I think was it 2000, was it 8 or 6? I don't remember offhand. But anyways, it's been around for a while. So, it's accumulated its fair share of, plugins that people don't actually maintain because they weren't popular or whatnot, but a lot of the main popular ones have made the jump to Grails 3. And you can search for in here by owner, you do sort, label, all that fun stuff. We're just going to look for the Spring Security. And there's actually a bunch of Spring Security plugins. One you'll notice right at the top, not one of my favorites, is Spring Security ACL, which I will address when I talk about the Enforcer plugin in the next video or so. But the one we're most interested, and the one I think is one of the most useful, is Spring Security Core. So this one was originally written by Bert Beckwith, and I think he still maintains it. So when you click into it, there's a bunch of things that you can get access to. Package, I think this is the bin tray, so where it's actually stored. Kind of like a online cloud Maven repository. You can get access to the source and the issues. These links will actually depend on how people have set things up. I've seen people actually reverse the two by accident, but not a huge deal. And then there's usually some documentation. Now, the documentation may just point to the source and the Git repository, depending on the developer and how deep they went into actually providing documentation. Some people just provide it right in the Git repo. So let's look at just click this link over. So, this is, he didn't provide a lot of documentation here. He just provided a link to the real documentation. But, you can look through the source. You can look through the issues. And basically, a good, kind of meter as to how popular a plugin is if it has a lot of issues. So, that means people care enough to say, hey, this is broken, please fix it, or could you add this feature? So, if there's a lot of closed issues, that means this is, it usually gives you an indication that this plugin is actually being maintained. If there's a lot of open issues and, compared to closed issues, that might be, an indication of something else. But, if there are no issues, that probably means no one has ever used the plugin. And take with that what you will. A lot of times I look at plugins as a good start and, basically take them and modify them to my own ends. In the case of Spring Security, I think this is more than a good start. This is, probably what you should be using for security. There are a couple other plugins for security, like Shiro, but I don't think it really provides as much as Spring Security Core does. And there are extensions to this with the other plugins, like there's a REST-based one specific for doing REST security and things of that nature. You also see pull request and things like that. So let's go back here and click on the documentation. So, with any plugin, there should be some type of documentation, and what you'll be interested in is looking at the installation, because this is going to be the thing that you're going to copy and put into your build.gradle under the dependencies. So let's go to our application, and you'll see here that I have set up Spring Security Core. I'm using a different version than the very latest because I'm also not using 3.1. I'm not sure if depending on the plugin developer, they will use different versioning schemes. Depending on what they think is important, whether or not they how they do it. So you might have to read the documentation to figure out what their versioning scheme is. But I found that this particular version does work fine for what I want to do. I know there were some point releases after that, and I should probably bump it. But for the sake of not angering the demo gods, I'm going to go for something that I know works for now. So basically, you set this up. One of the things is with Grails plugins is they usually come from the Grails repo, which is you get that built in for you. You also get access to Maven Local, which is anything that you build locally. But if you wanted to access, say, like some other plugin that hasn't officially been released, but is in, say, bin tray, you could add a Maven link here to that and actually get access to it and compile it in your dependencies. Or if you, say, have your own Maven repo or like Artifactory repo, you can actually put like those Maven links in here. Now there's also another place for repositories. This is build script, just to contrast this. This is where like dependencies and the repositories for specific build things are set, and these are more of the dependencies for like compile time, runtime, and testing. So you have those. So now that I have it installed, let's actually go over to my terminal. And I actually already checked out the step 10 Spring Security. So let's just do a get k here, and we'll bring this up. And one of the things that you'll find this in the documentation was a script that you can run to get started that will generate up certain things for you, like any other Grails thing, like the controllers. Plugins often come with scripts that help you get started. And with this one, basically I gave it a package and the two domains that I want for user and role, which basically I've seen user be person and role be authority, depending on what you want to call it. And I know they also added the notion of group, and that came in a more recent version of Spring Security, if I know correctly. I've also added the database console here. That's just something I added in this step, and I'll show that in another future video. So I ran this to get started, and it generated up a couple things within the application.groovy for us. So we'll take a look at that. So let's close this, and we'll go over to the application.groovy, and it gave us some basic configuration. This is it's out of the box configuration. So it created our mapping to the user class, a user role class, because user and role have a many-to-many relationship. And basically, we'll look at these classes because looking at user role and how it relates is actually, I would say this is kind of the way to do many-to-many in my perspective, rather than using the has-manys and stuff like that. This is like one of the better examples, kind of where I got the adding the get property that you saw before. So moving on, we have static rules. So these are basically the rules that are usually set up for your static resources. However, this can also be a place where you set up rules for things that are in plugins, because normally you aren't going to be editing the code in plugins unless you say run a script that generates something that overrides the plugin. If it's something that just lives in the plugin, you might set a rule here to secure that. So the basic Spring Security, the way it works is, essentially it's role based on a user basis. So basically, all of these things, most of the static content, you want everybody to be able to access those, just to make it so that your application actually functions properly from, like, say, the front end JavaScript and CSS side. So basically, we use permit all here. For the admin, so as you may recall, I made some admin controllers, and basically all of these, their URL will be like media admin or project admin. And what I did was I set a rule for a URL that contains admin in it, and basically I gave it the access role admin. So all the roles, this is more of a Spring Security thing than the plugin, but they all have this prefix called role, and they're usually all capitalized. There are ways to work around this, but in newer versions it causes issues if you try to override it and get rid of the role completely. I had that at one point, and I think it was in the 2.0 version. It was just better to have it and not mess with it, not trying to confuse the actual underlying Spring Security library, because there are other things that you can add to this. You can actually put a comma here and add in is, I think it was a comma, but like is fully authenticated, which actually allows Spring Security to know that, oh, if there's like say a remember me with a cookie, for this particular URL or thing that you're protecting, ignore that and do a full authentication. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and that's why the role or the prefix is there, so that it can discern between an actual role and some of the other commands that it looks for. So moving on, let's look at a controller. So in here, I put an @secured annotation, and in this one I did permit all. So basically, anyone can come in and look at this. You can change this to like role admin, like I showed you before, and I'm applying this at the class level. So it means it's actually applying it to all of the actions that we have here. Now, if you apply one on the action level, like this one will actually override the class level. And here you can see that I'm using the role admin. So if a user actually hits this, what will happen is they'll be directed to a logon screen, and they'll have to type in their username and password, and if they're not valid, this will actually throw an error, and it'll say access denied or something of that nature. So I'll show that in a little bit. So these, I actually like these annotations because it shows you the security actually on top of like the action that you're actually using, so that it makes it at a quick glance you can see, oh, this is the security for this action. I don't have to go to some separate config file to see what's going on here. And it actually also separates it out as an annotation that's on top of the action rather than mingled in with the business logic code. So one other thing to note is these annotations are meant for the controllers. They're not meant for services, unless things have changed more recently, from what I understand. Just because that's where you do most of your role checking. Now there is the Spring Security ACL, which, like I said, I'll mention later on, and there's an issue with using these within services, but we'll talk about that later. So let's see. Let's move on. I'm going to go into the bootstrap. So what I did here was I created up a bunch of just data to push into my database before the application loads, which I put into the bootstrap, which I mentioned I think maybe on the first episode. So basically, what you see me doing here is this is how you would create up objects. And basically you just take the object, new object, and you match up the parameters with the values, and then eventually I'm doing a save. You can actually do this in multiple steps, like you could assign this to project and then do project.save or things like that. But I'm just doing it in one swoop here. And you'll notice that in my save I have a flush true and a fail on error. Now this is specifically because I want this to fail quickly. In the bootstrap, in normal course of operations, I would not use flush true, because what flush true does is it forces it to go to the database right now, and particularly that kind of voids any transactions you have. So basically you don't have the ability to roll back. So if you're using flush true, be careful that you're using it in an area that you actually want it, not because you're having some weird error and you can't figure out why. That usually means you did something, you're trying to do something wrong, and basically just forcing it to the database. This will cause you different errors because you're, like I said, voiding the transaction. Now, fail on error true I have set here because basically I want this to throw an exception if it fails. Because by default, when you save, if there is any validation exception, what this will actually return is null. And you can use that to your advantage within your regular programming. Just say, do a save here and then check to see if the value is null. If it's null, it didn't save, so there's some parameter error, and you could throw back an error to your front end. Now the reason it doesn't have fail on error true set by default globally, which you can do if you want, is because that the makers of Grails decided that generating up stack traces is something that's fairly expensive, and it is for especially for larger projects. Generating up a lot of exceptions, that the exception building it up, because there's metaprogramming and Groovy and whatnot, can be it can be a cost. So to play devil's advocate, if you have a relatively small application, doing fail on error true might not be that bad. But as I said, earlier, you don't really want to use exceptions for your flow control. That's usually seen as not a good thing. But that being said, with the exception of when you just do a save, if you actually do an update, which basically I had something that already saved here, and I did a save here, what will be populated back into this object is one that has errors in it that you can actually check and do something specific based on what happened. So that's one thing that you can actually do. You can also do a domain object dot validate and see if it actually is valid. So those are things that you can play with. So basically what I'm doing here is I created a project, I created some media, some reports, some more projects, some user roles so that I can actually test this. And basically just so I can show you how the users and the roles actually work. So let's run this application. And I'm going to go back to the project controller. So I have permit all for this one. I think, let's see, media controller. I have role user for this one. So let's just go through some of these. And basically we'll go to the project controller, and I could go here and you can see some of the things that I actually set up here. You know, modify these and play with these. I also put in this search here, which you saw in an earlier part of code, so that I could just play around with searching for things. So there is that. And so let's go to the media controller, which had role add, or actually, yeah, the media controller. And you'll see I am prompted with a user login. Actually, let's go back to the bootstrap. I think I just said gave it user password. So if I type in user and I type in, let's just type in crap and see. Hey, it wasn't able to validate, so that's good. So let's do it again and type in the right password. Hit enter, and then we actually get access to our view. So now if we go home, I added this little button to log out just so that I had a way to show log out. So if you want to look in to how that works, you can. So basically it logged me out. So now if I went to, say, the admin controller, now it's prompting me to log in again. So I'll do user password, hit enter. Oh, I'm not authorized to view this page, so I get a nice little error. Depending on your application, you will have to deal with these errors that come back. Usually, if you have an error like this with, like, say, a JavaScript front end, you might get a 401 or something like that, or a 403 actually, maybe. But basically, this allows you to actually do role-based controls. So I'm just going to go back here, log it off again, doesn't really matter. So that's Spring Security. And basically that just gives you the ability to add security to your application. And there are many other plugins that allow you to do other things, but this is I would say one of the more important ones that you should know about and should try to get familiar with. There is a lot more depth. Let's see, depth to this in terms of configuration and what you can do with it, what the defaults are. So if you are security minded, or if you have a particular application that needs security, this is something to get to know very well. And security is not easy. This will not solve all your problems, but it gives you a good start. And sets you up to be a little bit more successful. But security is a much broader topic than just this plugin. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say about plugins and the Spring Security plugin. So I'll pick it up next time with the Enforcer plugin.